If they ask me, I could write a book about the way you walk and whisper and look. I could write a preface on how we met, so the world would never forget. And the simple secret of the plot, it's just to tell you that
Rupert Stonebird watched from the window of his new house as two women walked rather too slowly down the road.
They are watching me, but I no doubt am watching them too. Men and women may observe each other as warily as animals hidden in long grass.
Being an anthropologist, such musings came naturally to him. The women in question were the vicar's wife, Sophia Ainger, and her sister Penelope, returning from a shopping trip. The afternoon's shopping had been arranged to console Penelope, who was still young enough to suffer disappointments in love as commonly as colds or headaches.
How old would you say that man standing in the window of that house was?
Oh, in his 30s, probably. I didn't see him very clearly.
Yet Sophia had retained an impression of somebody so ordinary-looking that his very lack of distinction was in itself reassuring.
I suppose Mark will call on him, now that he's living in the parish.
He will do what a parish priest ought to do. You can depend on that.
It's a comfort when people do what they ought to do. Not like him.
Never mind, Penny. He wasn't good enough for you anyway.
Men and women never match each other in that way. That's life.
No, women are usually too good for men, but Mark is much too good for me.
Penelope did not answer Sophia.
Mark never seems quite real to me. He's invariably kind and courteous, but he's not particularly interested in human beings. A somewhat doubtful quality for a parish priest.
Ianthe Broom hurried her way to work at the library. Librarianship had seemed a ladylike occupation, and one that would bring her into contact with a refined, intellectual type of person. Instead, Ianthe found herself handing out books to ill-mannered, grubby students and cranks of all ages. When she arrived at the library, Mervyn Cantrell, the librarian, was unpacking his lunch. He was a tall, thin, irritable-looking man.
Good morning, Miss Broom. I hope you're getting settled into your new house.
Yes, thank you. My furniture seems to fit in very well.
You've got some nice things, haven't you?
Well, family things, you know, but one gets attached to them.
I remember you had a lovely Pembroke table. I coveted that. And those dining room chairs, Hepplewhite, aren't they?
Yes, I believe so.
Surely you must know if they are.
You must come over and see for yourself when I've got things a little bit tidier.
She found the conversation embarrassing and turned to thoughts of a sympathetic nature.
Poor Mervyn. I ought to feel sorry for him. He lives with his disagreeable old mother. He's disappointed at not having a job at one of the university libraries, and few friends of either sex. And he's unable to eat restaurant food. The list seems endless.
Miss Broom, allow me to introduce John Shallow. He will be Miss Grimes' replacement.
How do you do, Miss Broom? I must say, all this is rather terrifying for me. These card indexes and things, or should one say indices? I never know.
Just ask Miss Broom if there's anything you don't understand, and she'll explain it.
Why, of course.
I'll leave you to it then.
Left by themselves, John and Ianthe made a wary appraisal of each other.
She's rather pretty, with an air of good breeding. Rather shy of men, I suspect.
He's rather handsome. But if I'm honest, I would have preferred a woman of my own age and background. I don't like men very much, except the clergy, and I find younger women rather alarming. Miss Grimes is hardly the most congenial of companions, but at least she's familiar.
Fancy me working in a library again.
Why? You haven't been doing this sort of work?
No, I've been freelancing the last couple of years.
Oh, I didn't know they could do that in libraries.
No, not in libraries. You might be rather shocked if I told you.
Shocked? Do you think so? People do so many unusual things nowadays.
Well, this was film work, actually. Crowd work and that sort of thing. Dancing in a nightclub scene at 8 o'clock in the morning. TV commercials too, sometimes.
How interesting.
But film work is very precarious, of course, so I thought I'd better get a steady job for a bit. Especially when my money ran out.
For the rest of the day, Ianthe found herself studying John and taking in the details of his appearance. When tea was brought, he took out a book he had been reading over his lunch. It turned out to be, most improbably, Ianthe thought, a paperback selection of the poems of Tennyson.
You read poetry?
Oh, yes, do you?
Yes.
Now lies the earth all darnay to the stars, and all my heart lies open unto thee. I rather like that. How do you pronounce darnay, by the way?
I don't know.
Ianthe bent her head over her work and said nothing more. This was not at all what she had imagined in place of Miss Grimes. As it happened, this, her last morning, found Miss Grimes dusting books in the reading room, which was so far empty of readers.
And how's his nibs this morning? Now tell me the library gossip. What's this new young man like? More to our Mervyn's taste than a girl, I shouldn't wonder.
He's very pleasant.
He might do for you. It's not too late.
Oh, but he's younger than I am.
Well, you're not on the shelf yet, even if you are a librarian.
Really, she wasn't a very nice old woman. It was the vicar's first bazaar at St. Basil's, and his wife Sophia was eager for it to be a success. She encouraged the waiting parishioners to enter. Father Anstruther, a former vicar of St. Basil's, was the first to arrive.
Ah, Mrs. Anger.
Welcome, Father. So good you could come.
You see before you the dog returning to his vomit.
Sophia was saved the need to respond by the sudden appearance of her sister Penelope.
I was just talking with your new neighbor, an interesting-looking man.
Yes, Rupert Stonebird. He's an anthropologist.
And his wife?
He's unmarried.
Oh.
We introduced him to some of our parishioners.
Who?
Edward Kincaid and Ianthe Broom.
Ah.
Just then, Penelope took note of two quite personable-looking men who had just come into the hall and were greeting Ianthe Broom with every appearance of being old friends.
Why, Mervyn, and Mr. Challer too. How did you know about St. Basil's Bazaar?
Oh, you let slip a word about it. Something about making 24 sausage rolls.
Shall we buy something off your stall, Ianthe?
Yes, of course, you must. I'm not sure there's many things suitable for men, though.
She looked helplessly at the aprons, bed jackets, and hand-knitted babies' woolens.
I'll have this mauve bed jacket for Mother. It'll be just the job.
This blue one's pretty. It would suit you, Ianthe.
Ianthe turned away, slightly embarrassed, and began wrapping up the purchase.
Perhaps we should move on to the homemade cakes. I should like to buy a sponge before they all go. Oh, Ianthe, we hoped we might get a peep at your house.
Oh, yes, of course. It will be a good chance for you to see it. A cup of tea or a glass of sherry. I should be so pleased.
I'm dying to see where you live.
Cupid, draw back your bow and let your arrow go.
The small party set out for Ianthe's home. As they headed down the road, they met up with Rupert Stonebird.
Is the bazaar over? Oh, what a shame. I was correcting papers and I took no notice of the time.
We did rather wonder what happened to you.
Rupert, Ianthe invited us in for a glass of sherry.
Yes. Would you like to join us? Oh, I'm sorry. You don't know Mervyn Cantrell and John Challow, do you? We all work together.
Well, I'm only a sort of stooge. Mervyn and Ianthe are the clever ones.
They turned towards Ianthe's gate and went into the house.
What a cosy home!
And there's that lovely Pembroke table.
John and Rupert sat down rather stiffly, not quite liking to roam about the room appraising the furniture and objects as Mervyn was doing. Ianthe and Penelope went upstairs to take off their coats. Penelope was interested to see Ianthe's bedroom.
A typical English woman's bedroom. In boringly good taste. There's something chilling and virginal about it. Oh, Ianthe, you have a little statue or something in your garden. Looks rather sweet.
Oh, yes, it's a kind of cherub. It was here when I came.
Perhaps it's significant or prophetic.
Yes, perhaps. I hope it means that I'm going to settle down happily in this house.
Settle down? With Rupert, perhaps. She did betray a certain eagerness inviting him along. Oh, it's unthinkable. Yet they do live near to each other, so there could be danger.
Well, we must be getting downstairs, or those poor men will think they're never going to get that glass of sherry.
As Ianthe came into the room, Rupert appraised her with an anthropologist's detachment.
She really is perfect in this setting. Ianthe, let me do that for you. It really does not seem fitting for you to be pouring out drinks.
I'm afraid sherry is all I have. I hope everybody likes it.
What shall we drink to?
There was a moment's silence, perhaps of embarrassment, as if too much of an occasion were being made of it.
It's a rather strange collection of men and women. None of us really know each other. What indeed could we drink to?
Why, to the success of the St. Basil's Bazaar. That's surely the obvious toast.
In the library where Ianthe worked, the approach of Christmas had made itself felt, though it would be too much to say that any noticeable increase of goodwill could be discerned. On the last day before the holiday, Mervyn seemed more irritable than usual.
Mother is a spiritualist, and somehow that doesn't make our Christmas a very jolly one.
I suppose preoccupation with those who have, died isn't quite in accordance with the spirit of Christmas.
No, and our relations who have passed over seem to be a particularly dreary bunch. Now, here's something wrong again. Look at this card. London, colon, not semicolon, and not comma. I should have thought it wasn't too difficult for other people to get the details right occasionally. That doesn't seem to be too much to ask, does it? I can't see everything myself.
Just before 5 o'clock, Mervyn came up to Ianthe carrying a wrapped bottle with a Christmas label tied round the neck. She produced from her shopping bag a box of crystallized fruits, and a mutual exchange took place.
This is Madeira. It seems a suitable present for a respectable unmarried lady who might be visited by clergy.
Oh, I don't think of Ianthe like that. A respectable unmarried lady? That makes her sound old and dull.
Well, I am that.
You're old compared with John.
Yes, of course. Quite a lot older.
What does age matter?
In some cases it does.
Mervyn got a bottle of sherry and some glasses out of his private cupboard.
A little drink before Christmas.
After one glass, Ianthe said she must go. She had bought some cigarettes for John and was wondering when she could give them to him. She was about to leave when he came up to her with 2 bunches of violets, so that she was able to press the cigarettes into his hand while taking the flowers from him.
Chances are, 'cause I wear a silly
As Penelope left work, she passed a learned society and wondered idly whether she might see Rupert. She was excited to see the great carved door wide open, with groups of people coming out.
Why, it's Father Anger's wife's sister.
Yes, Sophia is my sister. We were together at Miss Broom's house after the bazaar.
Were you on your way to the vicarage now?
Where am I going? Home, I suppose, to wash my hair and have an early night. But where is he going? That's the point.
Would you like to have a drink with me? That is, if you've no immediate engagement.
Yes, that would be very nice.
They reached the pub, which was full and rather cosy.
So you were at a lecture tonight, I presume?
I was there to hear a paper being read. This happens quite often, and we usually finish about this time.
He's rather less interesting than I remembered. A little older, slightly inhibited in his conversation, and unresponsive to my semi-flirtatious looks and remarks. Must be something to do with being an anthropologist. It's a rather dark and mysterious line of work. Not quite manly.
Her eyes have a curious, bruised look about them. Or perhaps it's just the lavishly applied purple eyeshadow. There's something slightly comic about her appearance. Rather like a pre-Raphaelite beatnik.
Have you ever been married?
No, it hasn't come my way. Marriage.
But other things. Oh, lots of other things, I'm sure.
There are other things, after all. What was it Dr. Johnson said? Love is only one of many passions, and it has no great influence on the sum of life.
Do you like your house? Are you happy in it?
Yes, and I have good neighbors, which is pleasant.
He must mean Ianthe Broom.
Do you know, one of them brought me an oxtail the other evening.
An oxtail? Whatever for?
To eat. It was in a basin.
Oh, I see, cooked. But surely not a whole oxtail.
Well, I don't know. It lasted me 2 meals.
Fancy that.
Oh, it's such a bore cooking when one is alone. I thought it was very kind.
How naive he is. I almost can't imagine Ianthe bearing a portion of oxtail up to his door.
Do you live far from here?
No, I could get a bus to South Kensington.
Then I shall get a train in the opposite direction. Good evening.
As Rupert walked to the train, he contemplated their conversation.
Might be amusing to run across her sometime. No doubt I'll see her at the vicarage.
Penelope also contemplated their conversation.
The evening, if you could call it that, wasn't exactly successful. I was rather cagey about Ianthe Broom bringing the oxtail. I'll have to be subtler than that. Bringing food won't be enough.
Reading, were you? Ah, Tennyson.
Yes, but I was going to make some coffee. Would you like some?
Yes, thank you. How convenient women are. The way they're always just going to make coffee or tea, or perhaps just roasted a joint in the oven, or made a cheese soufflé. I didn't think people read Tennyson nowadays. But then, of course, you aren't just people.
Ianthe flushed and busied herself with the coffee tray. She had not exactly been reading Tennyson, but had remembered John quoting one of his poems during the first days of their acquaintance.
I'm thinking of giving a small dinner party in the spring. I do hope you'll be able to come. The other guests will just be two of my colleagues and their wives.
That would be very nice. I should like to come.
How comfortable it is here. Much better than sitting in pubs with bohemian girls. And what an admirable person Ianthe is. I don't quite love her, but I would like to see her always in my house, like some suitable decoration.
There is talk of a party from the parish going to Rome after Easter. Will you be joining us?
I have a conference in Perugia over Easter. I could possibly arrange to come on to Rome afterwards. Azaleas will be massed on the Spanish steps by then.
The vicar and his wife are coming, of course, and I expect Penelope will come too. It should be lovely.
Yes. I might have an amusing time with the two women. Who knows what might come of it?
When Ash Wednesday arrived, Ianthe found herself going alone to service at her uncle's church.
I'm glad I didn't ask John to accompany me. He's obviously interested in me, though I've done nothing to encourage him, and it makes me rather shy. I doubt I will marry, but perhaps somebody suitable will turn up one day. Somebody who combines the qualities of Rupert and John.
When the service ended, she was surprised to find John waiting for her outside.
Hello, John. Have you been in church?
Yes. That fur collar suits you.
It's nice and warm on a day like this. We must hurry back or we should be late.
I'm sure Mervyn won't mind us being a few minutes late. And for such a good cause.
I didn't know you went to church regularly.
Well, I haven't done up to now. I really only went today because of you. I'm afraid I followed you.
But that isn't the right reason for going. You shouldn't have followed me. If you'd wanted to go to church, you should have gone to St. Ermin's, which is much nearer.
But I wanted to be where you were.
What a ridiculous young man. And yet, why shouldn't he be fond of me? He could be, well, a younger brother, but he's looking at me in a way that doesn't quite seem brotherly.
They arrived back at the library to find Mervyn in a state of low irritation.
Oh, there you are, you two. I can't have all my staff out to lunch at the same time.
I'm sorry. We've been to church.
That doesn't impress me. A friend of mine knew a clergyman who used to have bouillabaisse flown over specially from Marseille every Ash Wednesday. I don't call that self-denial.
Well, we didn't have anything like that. Is there something wrong with that book you're holding?
The pages are stained with gravy or some kind of reddish sauce.
However can that have happened? I thought people weren't allowed to take books out of the library.
Normally they aren't, but the staff sometimes use their discretion.
Oh dear. Was it somebody I gave permission to?
It was. You know, John, she rather likes good-looking young men. I once caught her letting one eat his sandwiches in the library, which, as you know, is strictly forbidden.
It was such a cold day, so I thought just for once.
She stopped, feeling that too much attention was being drawn to her. Sophia hadn't seen Ianthe in a while, and she was concerned that she might be ill. She rang the front doorbell and waited as she heard footsteps coming down the stairs.
Oh,
I came to see Ianthe. I was worried because she wasn't in church on Sunday.
No, she's ill. I called, quite unexpectedly, just before you came and found her in bed, so I'm filling her hot water bottle.
So I see. It's most disquieting that the man I intend for my sister's husband should be filling the hot water bottle of another woman. You should have taken the cover off before filling it. Look, it's all wet.
Yes, the water spluttered up. Why is she short with me? It's not my fault Ianthe's in bed with the flu. I only called to ask her advice about my dinner party.
I'll take that up to her.
Oh, good then. I'll go. She won't want too many visitors at one time. Would you explain that to her then?
Yes, certainly.
Sophia went up the stairs and knocked.
May I come in?
Oh, it's you, Sophia. How nice.
Oh, my dear, you look wretched.
Yes, I feel awful anyone seeing me like this. But as it was only Rupert Stonebird, it didn't seem to matter.
Have you had supper? Let me make you some eggs. Only Rupert. That's a good sign. Perhaps there's no need to fear that there's anything between them. He had seemed glad to relinquish the hot water bottle and let me take over. Though one never really knows what a man is feeling.
The day comes in the life of every single man living alone when he must give a dinner party, and that day had now arrived for Rupert Stonebird. Rupert was in his study, deep in the intricacies of a genealogy, when the telephone rang. It was a colleague, Everard Bone, who with his wife Mildred was to be one of the guests that evening.
hello, Rupert. It's Everard Bone. Such a nuisance. Mildred has the flu. She thought it would be unwise to come out this evening, so I'm afraid that's that. She sends her apologies, of course.
I'm so sorry. I had been looking forward to seeing you both.
Oh, I shall be coming. I only rang to say that Mildred can't.
The other guests were to be two more anthropologists, Gervase Fairfax and his wife Robina, and of course Ianthe Broom. Now all that remained was to find a suitable woman to replace Mildred.
What about Sophia Anger's sister? She's a rather odd young woman. She would be suitable, though. But what's her name and where does she live? And will she be free at such short notice? Dare I even ask her?
Soon thereafter, Penelope arrived at Rupert's door, and he greeted her warmly, being pleased to have remembered her name.
Ah, Penelope. How nice to see you. was good of you to come on such short notice, and lucky for me that you had no date for this evening. Or as you so easily might have done.
No, I wasn't doing anything, and one is always glad of a free meal.
Jolly good. And it's an excuse for me to have a better meal than usual, too. Would you like to leave your coat in the spare bedroom? It's the door facing you at the top of the stairs. Ianthe is just arranging some flowers on the table.
Penelope reached the bedroom and spied Ianthe's fur jacket lying on the spare room bed.
Moleskin. Did anybody have anything made of moleskin nowadays? And a silk scarf? Looks like something somebody's missionary aunt brought back from India 30 years ago. But of course it is real silk. So tiresomely good, like all of Ianthe's things.
Penelope went over to the long mirror to survey the general effect of her dress.
It's a little tight and a little short now, but none the worse for that. I could at least provide a complete contrast to Ianthe.
At the bottom of the stairs, she met Ianthe, coming out of the dining room with some leaves in her hands.
Hello, Penelope. I've been doing the flowers.
Yes, so I see.
The spring flowers are so lovely now. In the shops, I mean.
And in the south of France, or so one imagines.
Oh, yes, of course. Rupert is in with Dr. Bone in the drawing room. I must go and dispose of these leaves. There really are too many.
She's difficult to talk to. Perhaps we shan't ever be jolly good friends. We really have nothing in common. Except Rupert.
Penelope now moved into the room where the guests were conversing.
Ah, Penelope, I expect you're ready for a drink. Will you risk my dry martini, or would you rather stick with sherry?
Sherry seems very safe and dull. I'll have a martini.
Allow me to introduce Dr. Everard Bone. Everard's wife has flu, so we owe the pleasure of your company this evening to that rather unfortunate occurrence.
Ah, here are the Fairfaxes.
I'm sorry we're late, but these newly fashionable districts are so remote that we really had difficulty in finding our way here.
Gervase would not ask the way, and the street lights were so few and far between, it was impossible to use our map.
Robina would not take a taxi, even if we had seen one.
Well, you're here now, which is the main thing.
Yes, here we are.
When all the guests were seated at the oval table in the dining room, Penelope found herself next to Rupert.
Penelope, I believe you'll shortly embark on a visit to Rome with the parish party. I'll be at a conference in Perugia at about the same time. May very well find myself in Rome after it's over.
We could have given you an introduction to Professor Vanchetti in Rome, but unfortunately he dropped down dead the other day.
Oh dear.
Yes, near St. Peter's, just by the obelisk.
He had borrowed a book of Gervase's. Now I suppose we shall never get it back.
It was an expensive book too, though fortunately I hadn't spent any money on it. It was sent to me as a review copy. Of course, I haven't written a review. I doubt if I should have had time. My own work takes up far too much.
The evening proceeded in a desultory fashion, and there was general relief when Rupert brought a decanter of port and a bottle of brandy to the table.
I thought you might like some brandy with your coffee. Or there's port, of course.
Brandy for me, please.
Oh, I don't think I'll have either, thank you. I always feel port was really for men, and brandy is rather associated for me with illness or disaster.
The men talked on, and it was a relief to all of them when at 10:30 Robina got up.
We have a long journey and must go now.
Everard Bone remembered his sick wife perhaps for the first time that evening, and offered to give the Fairfaxes a lift somewhere in his car.
There's plenty of room in the old jalopy.
Rupert found himself alone with Ianthe and Penelope, and his thoughts took a peculiar turn.
I believe these two women rather admire me. I fear, though, that there being two of them will rather limit the scope of what I might do.
After tea there seemed nothing for it but to escort them home. He left Ianthe at her front door and walked the short distance to the vicarage with Penelope. Had not Sophia been standing on the front steps of the vicarage now, he would have taken Penelope in his arms and kissed her. But she was not to know that he had this desire, and went into the house with head bent.
He paid no attention to me at all. What a complete failure I've been tonight.
So we gotta say goodbye for the summer. Baby, I promise you this.
As Ianthe walked away from the library, on her last day before the trip to Rome, John, who had not left her as he usually did to go to his bus stop, seemed about to ask her something.
I was wondering if you'd come in to have a cup of tea with me before you go home. Do you know of anywhere near here?
There's the Hummingbird.
It would be the first time she'd ever been with John to a place that was part of her own particular world. There was something romantic about the idea of sitting with him in the place where she had so often sat alone.
Shall we have the poached eggs?
Ianthe hesitated. The eating of eggs together had not figured into the romantic picture. Then she realized he must be hungry, and she felt a pang of that pity which is akin to love.
Yes, let's have that.
I wanted to thank you for visiting me when I was sick. It was sweet of you to come. It did me so much good.
We were worried about you.
Were you worried about me?
Oh, well, of course.
She was unable to meet his penetrating glance.
I will miss you during your Italy trip. You won't forget to send me a postcard of that fountain, will you? The one where you throw the money in and wish.
No, I won't forget.
Will you throw a coin in?
It depends.
I wonder what you'll wish for. I expect you'll wish I was with you. Or at least I hope you will.
Ianthe was saved from responding as the poached eggs were placed before them. They ate in silence for some time.
Would you care for some cakes?
I don't think I can eat any more.
You must be in love or something. That's what the loss of appetite usually means.
I'm not used to eating a meal at 5:30. I suppose that's why I'm not hungry. Of course, it's lovely having tea. I've really enjoyed it. But now I really must be going. I still have most of my packing to do.
As they walked toward the train station, he suddenly drew her towards him.
Goodbye, darling. I do wish I was coming too. Do take care of yourself.
And kissed her. Ianthe hurried down the escalator, boarded the train, and began to think about what had just occurred.
That John should have kissed me like that. And that I should not have minded would have seemed incredible a few months ago. But there's obviously nothing to do about it now. The holiday in Rome will no doubt put him out of my mind.
Resolutely, she determined to think no more about it, and opened her new copy of the Church Times, but progressed no further than the first page.
Volare
pensione in Rome was of the reassuringly old-fashioned type, which was used to catering mainly for parties of middle-aged English, American, German or Scandinavian women, though a few men in the shape of clergymen and husbands were also accommodated. It was within walking distance of the Spanish Steps, and fortuitously Babington's tea room. It was at the tea room that Penelope espied a good-looking Italian man staring at Ianthe with interest. At length he approached their table.
It is Ianthe Broom.
Why, yes. And you're...
Basil Branch.
Basil Branch, of course. Father Branch was one of my father's curates.
So he's a clergyman and not Italian. Still, he's good looking. And not being dressed as a clergyman, he might be an asset to our party. I wonder if he's unattached.
Penelope delicately broached the subject with Ianthe back at their room.
Do you think we'll be seeing much of Father Branch?
Basil Branch? I can hardly remember him, really.
Did you ever feel anything for him?
I? Feel anything for Basil Branch? Well, I suppose I quite liked him, as one usually did with curates, but there was no other feeling.
I thought you might have been passionately in love with him at one time. Actually, it's difficult to imagine you falling in love with anybody, if you see what I mean. And you're so cool and collected, a man would have to almost be perfect to come up to your standards.
What a strange idea you must have of me. I'm just like anybody else in that way. I could fall in love. It's not easy to tell her about John. A girl like Penelope would think very little of a bunch of violets, tea in a cafe, and a kiss in public.
You sound as if you're in love with somebody, but I mustn't ask who it is.
Ianthe's silence confirmed her worst fears. Obviously, she must be in love with Rupert Stonebird, but as they both knew him, it was awkward to discuss the subject further.
If only Rupert would come to Rome and put us out of our misery.
A few days after, as the St. Basil touring group returned to the pensione, exhausted after much sightseeing, there seemed to be some agitation at the reception desk. Rupert Stonebird, who had just arrived from his conference in Perugia, was trying to speak to the little man in the striped jacket.
Don't you understand? I want a room for a few nights. Sophia, can I ask your help? It isn't enough to have read Colucci when it comes to ordinary conversation. Somehow the things one wants to say aren't to be found in that excellent work.
Behind Sophia, he could see Ianthe and Penelope standing side by side. He was struck immediately by Ianthe's absolute rightness here, the Englishwoman in Rome.
I've sorted out your room, Rupert. Would you like to join us for dinner this evening?
Oh, what fun! I'm delighted to accept.
There had not been much time for romance or even flirtation at the conference. As dinner progressed, Rupert's thoughts turned to Ianthe.
I must find a way to be alone with her. Why, she's even more attractive than when last I saw her.
But plans do not always materialize, and somehow Rupert found himself alone with Penelope. She sensed he would have preferred to be with Ianthe, and this made her sulky, and on the verge of tears.
I suppose we should head back to the pensione.
What happened to the others? Did they go off together?
I don't know. I suppose they did.
And left you here with me? You must be disappointed.
On the contrary, I couldn't imagine a pleasanter end to a delightful evening. I really must try harder, but her rather curious behavior has not made things easy. Oh, how I long for the sensible maturity of Ianthe.
But I never brought you an oxtail like Ianthe did.
An oxtail? Oh, that!
Had you forgotten?
Yes, for the moment. But it wasn't Ianthe who brought it. It was Sophia.
Sophia? Oh, I see.
They paused in their journey home alongside the Spanish Steps.
Shall we stand here for a bit and look at the view?
If you like.
Penelope seemed quiet and sulky. After a while, Rupert saw to his dismay that tears were running down her cheeks.
Oh, what have I done or not done? Women are so hopelessly irrational. I'm certain Ianthe would not behave like this. Could it have something to do with the oxtail? What is it? I can't bear to see you cry. Is it my fault in some way?
No.
Please, Penny, don't cry. I can't bear to see you unhappy. You're always such a jolly little thing.
I'm so sorry. What you must think of me. Please, try to forget all about this if you can. It must be the Chianti. They say some wines have a depressing effect. How am I ever going to face him again? Jolly little thing indeed. How humiliating.
Rupert hardly knew what to say.
If only I could take her to bed with me. So much might be smoothed out there. Although, this might lead to even deeper complications. I'd really rather have a decorous flirtation with Ianthe. I doubt seriously that Penelope's in love with me. And yet, her tears are quite disquieting. I can hardly start paying attention to Ianthe at this stage. That will have to wait till we are back in England.
On her first day back at the library, Ianthe was hopeful that John would ask her to lunch and perhaps press his suit for her affections. Instead, it was Mervyn who asked her out for a meal. As dessert was served, he steered the conversation towards mothers, and it then turned in an unexpected way.
I expect you were very lonely when your mother died, until you got your lovely little house and all your nice things around you. If my mother died, we should both be alone.
Yes, I suppose we would be. But people's parents are dying all the time. People of our age, I mean. And there must be quite a lot of us living alone.
Supposing we were to join forces, it would be silly keeping on two houses.
Do you mean we should live together?
Well, not in sin. I wasn't suggesting that. Get married, that's what I meant, of course.
But I couldn't marry you.
And why not, might I ask?
We don't love each other.
Perhaps not, but there's marriage in marriage, if you see what I mean. We get on well together, and we've many interests in common, after all. The library, and we both like nice furniture. Earlier you said you couldn't marry me, as if you had someone else in mind.
Oh, I didn't mean anything like that. You misunderstood me. I don't suppose I shall ever marry.
That's not what John thinks. He's determined that if anyone marries you, it shall be him. I suppose he sees himself in your house, too.
Is it only for my house and furniture that I am to be loved? John coveting the Hebblewhite chairs?
Seriously, you want to be careful of John.
I shall behave as I always do. Could it be that John does want to marry me? And what did Mervyn mean, that I shall be careful of him?
That night in bed, Ianthe remembered that she had lent John some money when he was ill, and that he had never paid her back. Rupert stood looking at the invitation to a garden party in the grounds of the Anthropological Research Centre.
Dr. R. Stonebird and guest. Dress optional. One of Esther Clovis's touches, implying that anything from nakedness upwards would be acceptable. Guest. Little Penelope Grandison, perhaps? A chance to atone for whatever I did to make her cry on the Spanish steps? Ianthe, of course, would be an easier and more suitable choice.
Nonetheless, he settled on Penelope and rang her on the phone. When he announced himself, there was a perceptible chilling of air coming at him over the wires all the way from South Kensington.
I can't get an afternoon off in the middle of the week. I've just had this holiday in Rome.
Yes, of course. Oh, we must have a talk sometime.
In her haste to end the conversation, she did not hear properly and thought he said, walk.
Does he expect me to tramp over to Hampstead Heath or Richmond Park in unsuitable shoes? He might have at least asked me out for a meal.
Ianthe, rather to Rupert's surprise, was able to come to the garden party with him. She was glad to get away from her own thoughts, which were a miserable confusion of Mervyn's proposal and John's possible feelings for her. After the garden party, Ianthe accepted Rupert's invitation to his home. He handed her a glass of sherry and sat beside her, stretching his arm along the back of the sofa so that it almost touched her shoulders. Imperceptibly, she drew herself a little away from him.
It's so pleasant being here. I think Esther Clovis has decided to bring us together. And I must say, I rather like the idea.
Rupert tightened his arm around her shoulders and drew her closer to him. There was no doubt now that he was going to kiss her.
Oh, no! No, please, no!
I was only going to kiss you, Ianthe. Surely.
But I'd rather you didn't, please.
Don't you like me at all, then?
Yes, of course I do, but I'm in love with someone else.
He saw that her eyes were full of tears and thought back to that night in Rome.
And so, for the second time in a month, I, the kindest of men, have made a woman cry. But who can you be in love with?
Nobody you know.
I'm sorry. Of course, I never guessed.
I behaved so stupidly. It's all hopeless anyway.
Rupert took her arm in a brotherly way, and they walked in silence a few yards to her front door. As he walked back to his home, he pondered on what he had just learned.
Some married man. Probably a clergyman with a wife in a mental home. Or am I being too melodramatic? Perhaps it would be best if I let Esther Clovis find me a suitable wife.
Ianthe made a determined effort to pull herself together after her embarrassing scene with Rupert. She was so preoccupied she almost didn't hear John, repeatedly and almost frantically ringing the doorbell.
I just recalled to my horror that you lent me money back when I was ill, and I never paid you back. All this time, what you must think of me. Here.
No.
Please, you must. You must.
He placed the money in her hand and kept his hand upon hers, and presently all misunderstandings were forgotten and mutual love was declared. Upset by Ianthe's announcement of her engagement, her aunt and uncle, Bertha and the Reverend Randolph Burden, sought the intercession of Sophia Ainger. They called on her at the vicarage.
Do come in. I was just about to make tea.
Oh, thank you. A cup of tea will certainly make things easier.
What my wife means is that it will make it easier to discuss this rather worrying business. Ianthe has announced her intention of marrying. Ah, is that quince jelly I see? How delicious.
A most unfortunate choice. The man is several years younger than she is, and inferior to her socially. From what Ianthe tells me, he doesn't sound at all what one would have wished for her.
I don't quite see what I can do.
But tell her what a mistake she is making. She would respect your opinion.
I did have a conversation with Ianthe in Rome, and she told me she loved this young man. John, isn't it? But I'd never realised that she wanted to marry him.
At least he works in a library. One does feel that is something.
He is not, I understand, a qualified librarian?
No, I don't think so.
Perhaps if they love each other.
Bertha seemed to bring out the words with difficulty, perhaps because she had heard rather than experienced what love was and what it could drive people to.
But marriage is for a long time. What will they talk about in the evenings?
In the evenings?
Perhaps her life with Randolph did not have evenings in the way that of other married couples did.
The man can go to his club, and the woman can make quince jelly. So conversations in the evening need not be a problem. This jelly is so delicious, Mrs. Ainger, that I'm going to take the last spoonful.
I'll give you a pot to take away with you.
So kind of you. You have been most helpful. I dare say nothing will come of this business. Ianthe may come to her senses.
At least he's taking away a pot of his favourite jelly. That's a great deal more than one usually got out of trying to interfere in other people's business.
Can't get used to losing you no matter what I try to do. Gonna live my whole life through loving you.
Ianthe was surprised how much courage it took to break the news of her engagement to Mervyn. Her apprehension was justified in the silence that met her announcement.
Perhaps you guessed.
Oh, come now, dear. You can't expect me to have guessed anything as fantastic and as unlikely as that. Whatever next?
But it's true. One doesn't usually joke about such things.
You're certainly cradle-snatching, aren't you? John must be a good 10 years younger than you are.
Only 5 years. That's not much of a difference.
You wait till you're over 40, my dear, and he's still in his 30s.
Ianthe was silent, for she too had thought of this. She was relieved to see John coming into the room.
What's this I hear about you and Ianthe getting married? It isn't true, is it?
Of course it is. Aren't you going to congratulate me?
I might congratulate you, but I certainly won't congratulate her.
Well, I don't have to get your permission to marry her.
No, but you'll need a job if you're going to support a wife, won't you? And I'm not at all sure that I'm going to have you working here.
Then I'll work somewhere else. I suppose you want to marry her yourself. That's what it is.
None of the actors of the little scene realised that the door between the reading room and the library office had been left open when John came in, so that the raised voices were plainly audible to the woman at the reading table. To realise that two men could apparently be quarrelling almost publicly over a woman in this unchivalrous age sent her on her way with a new hope.
Going to the chapel and we're gonna get married.
Rupert had often attended weddings, or marriage ceremonies as the anthropologists called them, during his fieldwork in Africa. And although Ianthe's wedding was not at all like these, he was able to observe the proceedings with the same keen detachment as on those other occasions. As for the bridegroom, Rupert looked on him with a certain amount of prejudice, in the way an only moderately good-looking man would regard one much more handsome.
At least he appears devoted to her.
Later, when they were all crowding out of the church into the hall for the reception, Rupert found himself standing by Sophia and Penelope, the tears still glistening in their eyes.
Weddings always make me cry, no matter whose they happen to be.
Yes, weddings are very moving. The whole atmosphere generates emotion.
Do you think Ianthe looked nice?
How am I expected to answer? Is Sophia laying a trap for me? And Penny's also waiting for my answer. Oh, brides always look nice, of course, but I'm no judge of the details.
That ivory prayer book belonged to her mother.
Yes, it's strange, that use of ivory. When I was in East Africa, I didn't somehow associate the tusks of elephants with covers for Anglican devotional books.
Well, if you put it that way.
I must be talking to people, so I'll leave you to observe the scene. After all, you're used to doing that.
Rupert walked up to the bar and was saved from being alone when Mervyn Cantrell joined him there.
You performed your best man duties with aplomb.
Yes. I suppose I know Ianthe better than anyone here. In fact, if it hadn't been for me, we shouldn't be here at her wedding today. I watched them falling in love in the library. I was very touched when they asked me to be best man, I can tell you.
You brought them together, so to speak.
Oh, yes.
Rupert now edged quietly away from Mervyn, without seeming to do so, he hoped, and found himself once again at Sophia's side.
Wasn't it dreadful? I almost hoped somebody might stand up at the back of the church and forbid the marriage, like in Jane Eyre, and expose John as an impostor.
I know how you felt. I think I almost wanted it myself. I was wondering if perhaps Penny would have dinner with me.
Penny? Oh, but she's gone. She has a date for this evening.
Oh, I see. But I wanted to take her out. Well, what am I to do with the evening now? It's traditional to take a girl out on the evening of a wedding, and here I am with the prospect of an evening spent alone, correcting proofs.
A few days went by before Rupert made up his mind to approach Penelope. She was now working in an office near St. Paul's Cathedral, and he looked forward to taking her by surprise, so that she could not refuse a casual invitation to lunch. As he approached her building, he spotted Penelope sitting in the gardens, a half-eaten sandwich in her hand.
She hasn't seen me. I must approach carefully and not say anything to annoy or upset her.
For the tears that seemed romantic and even fitting in Rome on the Spanish Steps at night would be quite otherwise in St. Paul's churchyard at lunchtime.
Many a tear has to fall, but it's all in the game. All in the wonderful game that we know as love. You have words with him, and your future can't think but these things. Your hearts can rise above. Once in a while he won't call, but it's all in the game. Soon he'll be there at your side with a sweet bouquet. And he'll kiss your lips and caress your waiting fingertips, and your hearts will fly away. Soon he'll be there at your side with a sweet bouquet. Then he'll kiss your lips and caress your waiting fingertips, and your heart